The late afternoon sun burned low over the wild Arizona plains, spilling gold across the cracked earth. A hot wind whispered through the tumbleweeds, brushing against the weathered sign that hung crookedly above Clara May's tavern. The sign had lost half its paint, and the hinges creaked like the throat of an old prospector. Still, it stood proud, much like the woman who owned it. Clara May wiped the counter for the 100th time that day, though no one had sat there since morning. Dust settled on the shelves, and the silence was broken only by the lazy buzz of a fly trapped against the window. Her hands were calloused, her dress faded, but her eyes, soft hazel with flecks of amber, still carried a quiet fire. The tavern had been her father's once, before a fever took him and left her alone to face a world that cared little for poor girls with dreams too big for their pockets. That evening, as the sky deepened into a canvas of orange and red, the door creaked open. A shadow filled the frame, tall, broad-shouldered, and staggering slightly. The man stepped inside, the wooden floor groaning under his boots. He looked like he'd been walking for miles, his hat hung low, brim dusted white with salt, his coat torn, and his face hidden beneath layers of grime and sunburn. Clara instinctively reached for the old shotgun behind the counter. "Give me," he rasped, his voice dry as desert sand. "I want." His words broke apart. He stumbled forward and grabbed the edge of the counter. "Please, just a drink of water." Something in his tone, a raw, desperate honesty, made Clara lower the gun. She filled a tin cup and handed it to him. He drank like a man who hadn't seen water in days, his throat working in harsh gulps. When he finally set the cup down, he managed a faint smile. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice steadier now. "You might have just saved my life. Looks like the desert's been chewing you up and spitting you out," she said, studying him closely. His boots were cracked, his hands blistered, and though he stood tall, there was exhaustion in every breath. "I've been on the road too long," he replied. "Work ran dry. Money too. Guess I took the wrong trail." Clara nodded toward a corner table. "Sit. I'll get you some stew. It's rabbit. Not much, but it's hot." He hesitated. "I've got nothing to pay with." "Didn't ask for payment," she said, turning away before he could protest. "You look like you need a meal more than I need $1. When she brought him the bowl, he ate slowly at first, as though half afraid it wasn't real. Then hunger took over, and he cleaned the bowl spotless. "You make a fine stew, Miss Clara May," he said, eyes glinting with quiet gratitude. She blinked, surprised he'd known her name, but then realized her father's old sign above the bar still read Clara May's Tavern. Days passed, and the stranger, who introduced himself simply as Luke, began to linger around the place. At first, Clara didn't mind. He swept the floors, repaired the broken fence out back, and carried barrels from the well when her arms were too tired. He never asked for pay, only smiled that half-shy, half-wistful smile and said, "You've done enough for me, miss." The townsfolk noticed, of course. Tombstone was small, and every stranger drew whispers. Some said he was an outlaw on the run. Others claimed he'd lost his fortune gambling. Clara didn't care much for gossip. She judged people by their deeds, not their shadows. And Luke, despite the dust on his boots, treated her with a kind of respect she wasn't used to. One evening, as twilight settled over the plains, she found him sitting on the porch, gazing out toward the horizon. The sky was painted in streaks of rose and indigo, the air thick with the scent of mesquite. He was humming, softly, a tune she almost recognized. "You play?" she asked, nodding toward the old piano inside, its keys yellowed with age. He smiled faintly. "Used to. Haven't had much reason to lately." "Well, reckon you do tonight," she said. Luke hesitated, then rose and sat before the piano. His fingers, though calloused, moved with surprising grace. A soft melody filled the tavern, something wistful, beautiful, yet sad. Clara leaned against the counter, closing her eyes. It had been years since music had filled that room. When the final note faded, Luke looked up, almost embarrassed. Didn't mean to go on so long. You can play as long as you like, she said softly. It's been too quiet around here. In the following weeks, Luke became part of the rhythm of Clara's life. He repaired what was broken, helped travelers with their horses, and even painted the tavern signs so it shone bright again. Yet, there was always something distant about him, a weight behind his eyes, a secret he carried like a shadow. One night, rain swept across the plains, rare and violent. Clara stood at the doorway, watching lightning split the horizon. Luke was inside, drying off his coat. She turned to him. You ever gonna tell me what you're running from? He froze, his expression unreadable. I'm not running, he said after a long silence. Just trying to remember who I was before everything got tangled up in golden greed. Before she could ask more, the sound of hooves thundered outside. A group of riders burst into view, cloaks dripping, voices sharp. You seen a man about 6 foot, dark coat, answers to Luke Winchester. The leader barked. He's gone missing. Man's worth a fortune if he's still breathing. Clara felt her heart stop. Slowly, she turned toward Luke. He stood motionless, rainwater dripping from his hair, eyes locked on hers. I didn't mean to lie, he said quietly, the piano's last note trembling in the air between them. I just wanted to be someone else for a while. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It fell steady and cold, washing the dust from the tavern's roof, turning the yard into a patchwork of mud and puddles. Clara stood by the window, her fingers tightening around the curtain edge as she watched Luke saddle his horse. He hadn't said much since the night before, only that he'd leave once the storm passed. When she finally stepped outside, the air was sharp and damp. You're really going, then? She asked, her voice trembling against the wind. Luke turned, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. It's better this way, he said quietly. Those men'll come back once they know where I am. I don't want to drag you into trouble. Clara crossed her arms. Trouble's already here, Luke Winchester, she said, her tone caught somewhere between anger and heartbreak. You could have told me who you were. You think I'd have treated you different? He looked at her for a long time before answering. Most people do. When they hear the name Winchester, they stop seeing the man and start seeing the money. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, I ain't, most people. Luke smiled faintly, a small, sad curve of the mouth that spoke more than words ever could. That's why I stayed, he said. The silence that followed was thick, filled with the sound of the rain hitting the porch roof. Clara wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that his money didn't matter, that the man who'd fixed her fences and played her piano was the only version she cared about, but her throat locked up. He looked at her one last time, then swung into the saddle. The rain blurred him into a shadow as he rode off down the dirt road. For days, the tavern felt emptier than ever. The piano sat silent, the bench untouched. Clara worked twice as hard just to keep her mind busy, but every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of lamplight made her think of him. She told herself it was foolish, a poor girl pining for a millionaire, but her heart refused to listen. Then, 1 week later, the sun broke through. The storm had passed, and the desert shimmered like new gold under the clear blue sky. Clara was sweeping the porch when she heard the distant rumble of wheels. A fine black carriage rolled into view, drawn by 2 white horses that gleamed in the sunlight. She straightened, squinting as the carriage stopped right in front of the tavern. The door opened, and a man stepped out, clean-shaven, hair combed back, dressed in a dark coat that fit him perfectly. But when he smiled, Clara's breath caught. Morning, Miss Clara May, Luke said. Hope I'm not too early for lunch. For a moment, she couldn't move. The same man who'd arrived at her door half dead and penniless now looked like he'd stepped out of a painting, polished boots, silver cufflinks, eyes bright and calm. Yet something about his smile was still the same, the warmth, the gentleness. She found her voice at last. You shouldn't have come back, she said softly. Maybe not, Luke said, stepping closer. But I couldn't stay away. He handed her a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Open it, he said. Inside was a folded piece of paper, the deed to the tavern. Clara's heart stopped. Luke, I bought it back from the bank, he interrupted gently. You didn't know, but the taxes were overdue. They'd have come for it in a month. I couldn't let that happen. She stared at him, anger and gratitude tangling inside her chest. You had no right, she whispered. He nodded. You're right, I didn't. But I wanted to do something for the woman who gave a stranger water when no one else would. Her eyes filled despite herself. You think I helped you 'cause I wanted something back? No, he said, his voice steady now. That's why it matters. They stood there in silence for a while, the wind carrying the scent of the wet earth. Then Luke took a slow breath. Clara, I've spent my life surrounded by people who only cared about the Winchester name, the land, the cattle, the money. You looked at me when I was nothing, and you still saw something worth feeding, worth helping. He paused, emotion roughening his voice. I came back because I want to start again, not as the man everyone expects me to be, but as the man you already saw. Clara shook her head slightly, tears glinting in the sunlight. You talk big, Mr. Winchester, but I'm just a tavern girl. I don't belong in your world. He took a step closer, his tone soft as the desert breeze. Then I'll live in yours. Her breath caught, heart thudding hard. You'd trade your mansion for this old place. I'd trade everything, he said simply. Because this old place is where I found something I never had, peace. For the first time since he'd returned, Clara laughed, the sound breaking like sunlight through clouds. You really are crazy, she said, wiping her eyes. Maybe, Luke replied, grinning. But I've been a lonely rich man long enough. I'd rather be a poor fool with you. The wind rustled through the open doorway, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers from the hills. Somewhere inside, the piano gleamed under the light, waiting. Luke turned toward it, then looked back at her. Play me something, he said. Clara smirked. You play better than I ever could. Then play with me, he said. And so they did. Two souls at the edge of the world, one poor, one rich, their music echoing across the plains. It wasn't the grand halls of the Winchester estate or the bustle of Tombstone saloons, just a quiet tavern, an old piano, and a pair of hearts finally in tune. As the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold, Luke reached across the keys and took her hand. I came here looking for peace, he said softly. But I found love instead. Clara squeezed his hand back, smiling through the tears that shimmered like glass in the fading light. Then I guess the Wild West ain't so wild after all. And outside, the evening wind carried their laughter far into the open plains, a song of second chances, born from dust, bound by love.